Hey, what's up? It's Harvey Slater, Holistic Nutrition Coach. How's it going? So today I'm going to show you the simplest way I know to roast a spaghetti squash without having to cut it ahead of time. You just put it in the oven whole. This is a lot better for people who are a little intimidated by the hard shell and the woody ends. It's kind of hard to cut. It can be kind of gnarly sometimes. So this is just a really simple way to put the squash in the oven and not have to worry about cutting it until after it's cooked. And then I'm going to show you how to use the spaghetti squash strands with a sage almond cream sauce. It's kind of got the same aesthetic of like a pasta Alfredo, except for that it's way more nutrient dense and loaded with great nutrition. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Check it out. So to roast your squash, you want to preheat your oven to about 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you want to get a baking dish, about that size. And then a knife that's got a nice pointy sharp end, but that's small and sturdy. So a paring knife would probably be ideal. Something that you can control easily, because what we're going to do is basically just put a bunch of holes in the squash like this. And you want to keep your hands on the side so you don't stab your fingers, and then you just turn it about an eighth or a quarter turn, and then you turn it again, stab it some more. I'd say you're putting about 10 to 12 pokes in each quarter turn, about like that, and then turn it again. I think it requires about 5 turns total before you get it all done. And what you've got basically is just a bunch of holes in the outside of the squash. And this is just going to ventilate it a little bit so that it cooks nice and evenly. And then you just place this in the baking dish and just throw it in the oven. And it's basically going to need to go for about 45 minutes to an hour in an oven set at 425 degrees. So to make the sage almond cream sauce, you just need basically a Vitamix or a high-speed blender will work the best. And we're going to start with this is 1 cup of almonds that were then soaked in water for at least a couple hours. You can soak them overnight if you want, or just a couple hours. If you don't soak them, it's no big deal, but it's going to come out a lot creamier and better if you do soak the almonds. So these almonds have been soaked and then drained. So I'm going to add those. And remember, it's a cup before soaking. And after they soak, they'll expand a little bit. Then we're going to add 1¼ cups of any kind of plant-based milk is fine. So it can be toasted coconut almond milk like this one. Or it could be your favorite plant-based milk. Just try not to have any vanilla flavoring or sweetener or anything like that, because that'll screw up the flavor of the cheese. And I'm going to do about 1¼ cup. And you want to keep that on hand because you might have to add a little more if the sauce is too thick. Then we're going to add 1 tablespoon of my favorite plant-based dairy flavoring, which is not really dairy, which is some nutritional yeast. And we're going to put a tablespoon of that in there. And then we're going to put a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cumin. And then I've got in here, this is a really large clove of garlic. So 1 to 2 cloves is actually good, because if you like it more garlicky, I think you'll enjoy 2 cloves more. And then I'll put a couple pinches of salt and a little bit of fresh cracked pepper. And then we're going to squeeze some fresh lemon. By the time you squeeze this lemon through this strainer, if it's a good juicy lemon, usually a half lemon will give you about 1 tablespoon of lemon juice for the most part. So that's pretty much the measurement. And then we are going to put the lid on and start blending. Now it's going to take a while for this to get creamy. So it's going to blend for a little longer than you would expect. Maybe at least a couple minutes, maybe even up to 5 minutes, depending on your blender and how long it takes. You want to blend it until it's a nice, smooth sauce. So there's going to be little bits of the almond shell in there, or not the shell, but the the brown almond outer layer of the almond. There's going to be little bits of brown in the sauce, but that gives it some really nice, colorful texture. But once you puree it enough, that won't actually be grainy when you eat it. It'll be smooth, just like a cream sauce. So we're going to go ahead and let it rip. Okay, after it starts to look pretty creamy and pureed, you just want to take the lid off and you just want to test it for flavor and for creamy smoothiness. So just give it a little taste. And that's coming along. It's not quite there. You also want to scrape the sides down, because when you turn the blender on, sometimes it makes it, it makes it kind of jump in the pot, in the pitcher, and it kind of gets up on the side. So you want to scrape all that down so it mixes in really well. This actually needs a little touch more of salt, and but it's tasting really good. So we're going to let this go maybe another minute or so. Yeah, so this went for about another minute, and it's really nice and smooth. As you can see, it's got kind of a light brown, kind of speckled texture. But it's smooth. It kind of reminds you of Alfredo sauce a little bit, which is a great thing. I mean, everyone loves Alfredo sauce, right? Now I'm going to add. So this calls for about 4 to 6 large sage leaves. These leaves are pretty small, so I kind of doubled up. And the reason I wait till the end is because, for some reason, if you puree the sage too much, the flavor just kind of disappears. So we're just going to lower the speed on the blender down to the variable speed, and we're just going to gently let this puree in like that. Just enough to break it up and puree it in and release the flavors without completely obliterating it. So this should have a really great garlic and sage flavor now. And yeah, it tastes really good. There's one little sage leaf that didn't get in there. So yeah, there you have it. Your sage sauce, sage and almond cream sauce. So I will show you what to do with this in the next segment. Okay, so this squash has been going for about 55 minutes, and you can tell it's ready because when you push on it, it's nice and soft, and there's lots of juice coming out of the holes. So this guy's pretty much ready, and we had to let it cool for about 15 minutes so it could be manageable, right? So I'm basically going to take it off of the pan, and I'm going to put it here on the cutting board, and I'm going to use a serrated knife to cut this because it'll just be easier, but it's so much easier to cut when it's cooked. You just cut right through it like that, and then you have a perfect squash, and I'm going to show you how to scoop this out so you get the spaghetti strand kind of effect. Okay, so to get the squash out of the squash, so to speak, the first thing you have to do is you have to clean out some of the seeds. You just get some of the seeds and pith out of there, like that. But you don't want to get too much of the good stuff out, so just be a little bit careful not to go overboard. You might get a few seeds in your spaghetti squash at the end of the day, but they're cooked, so they're not that big a deal. They're just a tiny bit unpleasant. And if your squash is still a little bit hot, you might have to grab a little towel and use a towel between your hand and the squash. My squash is still a little hot, so I'm just going to use a tea towel to make sure I don't get burned. So I'm just basically getting the seeds out of there. You might have to yank some of that gooey stuff. And then once you pretty much have it clean like that, then you basically take a fork and a bowl, and you just gently scrape the inside, and you can see that it's starting to make that squash like that spaghetti type consistency. See that? It's pretty cool, right? You can actually keep it right inside its case, inside its skin, if you wanted to just put some sauce over it, and it could be its own contained bowl, but it's a gentle scraping kind of thing that you do, right? And that's gonna bring out the, and if you try to dig in, it breaks it too much, so you just have to gently scrape. Then you scrape some of that out, and you scrape some of that out into the bowl, like that, and the more you scrape it, the more it comes out like spaghetti. So that is pretty cool, right? I've never had a spaghetti squash come out like where it's squishy and it doesn't have its nice consistency. So it's pretty reliable. It's good for, I call it, it's good for low self-esteem cooking. If you're not feeling confident, you can do something like this and you feel really good about yourself afterwards because you made something homemade, you made something healthy, and it's really not that difficult, right? So that's pretty much what it looks like after you scrape all of the squash meat out of the skin. So I'm going to show you two different ways to enjoy this. This is a really simple version. We're just going to mix the almond cream sauce into the squash. So this is the almond cream sauce. It usually gets a little bit warm in the blender when you're blending it, but you can warm it up on a stovetop or in the microwave if you want. And we're basically just going to, we're going to put in a half a cup at a time until you get the creaminess and the consistency that you want. So this is a half a cup right here. And we're just going to mix that in. And that looks like to me like I want a little bit more of the creamy sauce. And you can see the steam coming out of the squash. So it's going to warm up the sauce pretty easily. So you don't have to worry about reheating the sauce too much, but you can if you want to. So I'm just adding the sauce to the squash about a half a cup at a time until I get the amount of sauce and consistency I want. That's completely up to you. I think about a cup's going to be good. So we're mixing this in. And you just want to mix it in so it's blended really well, but you don't want to smush up the spaghetti too much, right? And then you're going to want to give it one more taste just to see if it needs maybe a little nutritional yeast or salt and pepper or something like that before you serve it up. And you can see that it has a really nice, it looks kind of like spaghetti with Alfredo sauce. And that's kind of what the almond cream reminds you of a little bit. So it's really delicious and it's a great comfort kind of dish. So for serving, I'm just going to dish this up, and I'm going to go ahead and use the fork because that makes it easy to pick up the spaghetti squash. I'm just going to put it on like that on a plate. Maybe about that much. Make a nice little mound of beautiful spaghetti squash. Looking pretty nice, right? You can kind of try to spin it a little bit if you want to make it look a little fancier. And then I'm going to add I have some vegan or plant-based Parmesan cheese. And you can use, dairy Parmesan if you want. I just prefer to use plant-based cheeses. And then I'm also going to put a little bit more fresh sage leaves over it just for a little more garnish. And there you have a beautiful spaghetti squash with sage almond cream sauce. So be sure and try this out this week. Let me know what you think. I can't wait to see how you like it. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. So like I said before, I can show you a variation of just having only the cream sauce. If you want a little more substance, you can add some vegetables and things. So what I have here is about a tablespoon of olive oil, or virgin coconut oil, olive oil you can use, avocado oil you can use. I have one shallot, and I'm basically like caramelizing the shallot a little bit in the oil. And then I am going to add the rest of the sage that I didn't use for the other one. And I'm going to let the sage just kind of get a little bit crispy in the oil. Just for a little tiny bit. It really is going to bring out the flavor of the sage a little better. But you can see that you've got the sage and the shallots caramelizing. Then I'm going to add, this is about 4 ounces of cremini mushrooms. And we're going to let that saute for about 5 minutes until it gets brown. All right, so that's looking nice and brown. So now I'm going to add a nice big heirloom tomato cut up. And I'm gonna mix that together. I give it a little chef flip. You can stir it with a spoon if you're not comfortable flipping the pan like that, but it is kind of fun once you get the hang of it. And then I'm going to add a little bit of salt and pepper for flavoring, just for seasoning. Some salt and some fresh cracked pepper. And then we're going to let that tomato cook down a little bit, maybe another 5 minutes or so. And then the last thing I'm going to do is add the rest of the almond, the cashew almond cream that we made. It's about a cup remaining. The recipe we did makes about 3 cups total. And I'm going to add that in. So we basically have just come up with a whole different mushroom tomato cream sauce kind of deal, right? And like I said before, you could mix this with traditional pasta if you want. Today we're doing it with spaghetti squash just to show the different ways that we can make delicious spaghetti squash. And then all we're going to do, since we didn't use that other half of that spaghetti squash, remember, we're going to take that and we're going to spoon this awesome sauce over the top of that. So it's kind of like a mushroom tomato cream sauce over the top of spaghetti squash. You can also toss it in if you want. I'm just doing it this way for fun. And that looks pretty awesome, right? Yum, yum. And then if you want to put a little garnish on it, you can just put a little chopped parsley on top. And you have a pretty beautiful spaghetti squash with mushrooms, tomatoes, and sage almond cream sauce. Pretty awesome. So try these variations out. Play around with your spaghetti squash this week. Let me know what you think. Can't wait to have you try it. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Later days.